So welcome back. This is already the final segment of this week. Congratulations for making it so far. This week was on entrepreneurial marketing, and the customer as well as the competition were center stage during this week, because you need to understand both of these key players out there in order to make your sales. And I want you to remember one important quote that we have discussed this week in particular. And this is the quote by Peter Drucker, which said, "The purpose of a business is to create a customer and not a product or a technology." So let's revisit what we discussed this week. Beyond that quote, I want you to remember a key framework that we discussed right at the beginning and that we walked through during this week. It's this framework that shows you how entrepreneurial marketing can be structured and should be structured in your head. There are some fundamental issues that you need to understand about your business, which is your company's distinctive competence, your competitive advantage that you may achieve based on your competence. And then what is important to note, then there are some strategic decisions in entrepreneurial marketing, and then some more operational implementation decisions that you have to take. And this distinction is quite important, as we discussed, because segmentation and positioning are fundamental decisions that will then shape and affect the other types of decisions that you're going to engage in. For instance, regarding product service development, naming the company, your pricing, distribution, the sales force, promotion, public relations, and advertising. Let me briefly walk you through each of these elements, especially the strategic decisions and implementation decisions and options in a few slides. These strategic decisions relate, as I just mentioned, to segmentation and positioning, which is my target market. Typically, entrepreneurs have one particular target market. And the positioning question is, why will someone in the target market buy my product or service instead of the competition's product or service? So it's, how should I be perceived by my customers vis-a-vis competing products? Typically, as it's pointed out here, these decisions are made jointly, because you might think about your target segment and then come to the conclusion, well, the positioning that I want to achieve doesn't fit this target segment, or vice versa. So this is really a joint decision, and you might go a bit back and forth until you really understand your target markets and how the people, the customers in that target market will perceive you vis-a-vis the competition. Core to understanding segmentation and positioning is an understanding of your customers and of your competitors. And starting with the customer side, you remember that we discussed the benefits that your product is able to render to customers, to give to customers, because customers don't buy the features, they buy the benefits. And this is particularly important in a technology context, where many people are tempted to say, well, this product has so wonderful features. But the customer looks at the product from the perspective saying, well, what does this product do to me? What type of job does this product fulfill for me? In terms of understanding your customers, there are two key features, two key elements that are vital, to creating a successful firm. One is, of course, understanding your customers for making sales, and this has to do with understanding customer needs, and we talked about this at great length. The second element, which is equally important because you want to create a successful venture that creates value, is to understand customers from a value creation perspective, because not all customers create the same type of value for you, and try understanding which customer segments might be more valuable for your company will help you to allocate your time properly and especially your resources and attention. So in terms of understanding your competition, there are two key questions that we put to the forefront of our discussions. One was, who are your competitors? And two was, what would we need to know about these competitors? Oftentimes, and that's also what we discussed, entrepreneurs have this hunch of saying, well, we produce an innovation, and because we have that innovation, we do not have any competition. But that's oftentimes an indication that the entrepreneur doesn't really understand his competition well, and also not his customers well, because customers typically make a choice, what to spend their money on. So there is competition, at least for the money in their pocket. The intended outcomes of this type of analysis are manifold, and just to repeat a couple of those, first of all, you want to make your product stand out. You want to understand how to position your company. You also want to set your prices competitively and assess any threats of competing firms. Ultimately, it also helps if you understand your competition well. It helps you to be realistic on how successful you can be with your company, and this helps you to to judge resource requirements, it helps you to judge sales targets, etc., etc. So when you collected all of these insights, you have all the ingredients in place to develop a compelling value proposition. And we discussed the features of a compelling value proposition in a segment this week. In a nutshell, the value proposition can be stated very succinctly within this one or two sentences that you see next to me here. This sentence says, as a result of our offerings, our product or service, customers, you would fill in the profile, who are facing some kind of need, some kind of shortcoming, some kind of customer pain, will do experience something for a certain cost and enjoy the customer benefits, some return within or by a certain time frame. And then the competitive element comes in by saying, compared to these type of alternatives, the advantages of using our offerings are bing, bing, bing. So within that one sentence, you can actually very succinctly portray what your company's offering is about and why the customer should buy your offering and not the one of the competition. This sentence might sound easy to you, but it's actually hard work to craft a compelling value proposition. But I urge you to do this because you need to have clarity in your mind what your company is about. And remember what Drucker said, your company is about creating a customer and not the product or the technology. So this sentence helps you understand why and how you create a customer and not a product. And then moving to the implementation side, we discussed a couple of elements in the marketing mix. Remember the product, the price, the place, the promotion, the process, the people, and the physical environments, the 7 Ps. And you can formulate those elements in an orchestrated manner once you have these strategic decisions in place about your segmentation and positioning. And we mentioned that in a segment. And as you remember, there are a couple of interesting ways, unconventional ways, how startups can do their marketing. We talked about guerrilla marketing in that sense, which is oftentimes a type of marketing that is related to the promotional activities that you do in the marketing mix. We discussed a couple of examples to inspire you, but in essence, your mind is the limit. What you can imagine, in terms of novel ways of marketing your product, of getting the attention of customers, where the idea is really one with a small budget, you create a strong leverage in terms of the attention you get for your company and its products. So when we talked about guerrilla marketing, we also mentioned that your guerrilla marketing approach, your implementation there, is related to oftentimes to your promotional activities. But of course, this should be in line with your positioning of your company and what your target segment actually likes to see about your company. So don't offend your target segment just with any crazy type of guerrilla campaign, because that could be highly detrimental for your efforts to create a successful company. In addition, we talked about crowdfunding as a marketing tool. Remember that we will come back to this topic in another week when we talk about crowdfunding as a financing tool. But from a marketing perspective, crowdfunding has a couple of very interesting aspects. And as you may remember, it helps you to test and validate your market, put your ideas out there, observe investor behavior. It helps you to build a list of backers. You can build relationship to potential customers. It helps you also to build brand recognition and ultimately to boost growth. You might offer discounts on new or current products that you're developing. So crowdfunding platforms are actually, providing you with lots of non-financial gains, and that's oftentimes overlooked. So I think it's important that you engage in these types of activities in order to launch your venture. So we talked about 2 more elements: technology adoption and growth hacking. Technology adoption, remember the technology adoption lifecycle, in particular one element that was crucial, which was the idea of crossing the chasm. Remember that we had a chasm between the early adopters and the early majority of people in your target segment. Remember also that these people differ in terms of their responsiveness and their willingness to buy innovative products. And where the trap oftentimes is located is between the early adopters and the early majority. And there's a trap in the following way. You, as an entrepreneur, achieve first sales. You are successful. So the natural inclination is to put even more money behind your product, your marketing campaign, etc. But you overlook that actually, the next segment that you want to conquer, the early majority, where you start making a lot of money, that segment buys for different reasons. So keep in mind that in order to cross that chasm, you need to change your marketing message. You need to change how you communicate to customers, what type of profile of related services you might want to offer to them, etc., etc. And then finally, we talked about achieving significant growth. This is obviously one key goal that many entrepreneurs have, and that's also one key element of entrepreneurial marketing. In order to understand how to achieve growth, you have to understand in terms of the venture design, the scalability of your venture, and you have to understand, how you can accelerate growth by a relentless focus on growth. So you can look at the marketing mix elements that we discussed through a lens that allows you to grow, and try to design these elements in a way that allows you to grow. Oftentimes this is referred nowadays to as growth hacking. So you can also think about creative ways of how to piggyback on the growth of other companies, and we discussed some examples regarding this as well. So this brings us already to the very end of week 3. Time flies. This was week 3 with entrepreneurial marketing. It's a core topic, as I pointed out. This week we had learned a couple of very important frameworks, ways to understand entrepreneurial marketing. The marketing function is of vital importance to your company, so pay attention to it. Pay attention to designing your marketing in the most favorable way, and spend attention towards execution as well. So good luck with your marketing efforts. I see you around.